Promotional consideration provided by
Tri-State Wrestling presents Proving Grounds, May 28th at the Eagles Lodge in Vincennes. Doors open at 6, bell time is at 7, and costs only $5 at the door for anyone over the age of 4. Kids 4 and under are free. Come out and see Will Bray take on Zach Hogan. The winner will decide the stipulation of their TSW World Heavyweight title match at Night of Champions. Also, check out some of the hottest local indie wrestlers trying to make a name for themselves in a match exclusive to TSW, the Proving Grounds match. Many compete, but only one can win and earn a spot on the roster. So come on out for a night of family fun, and don't worry about dinner. The Eagles have concessions on hand. So bring the whole family. All the money raised goes to help the family of Phyllis Miracle Hall, who lost her battle with cancer. Come out to the Vincennes Eagles May 28th and show your support.
A Santa vlog!
Hello and welcome to the 10 Count Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Tiller. Wherever you are and however you're listening, thanks for making us a part of your day. Before we go any further, we are fan and listener supported. We bring this podcast to you for free every Saturday. Be sure and support us by subscribing on iTunes and SoundCloud, and while you're at it, go ahead and rate us on iTunes. That 5-star rating will help get us some attention and attract new listeners and sponsors. You can also visit our website, 10countblog.wordpress.com. We post every podcast there, as well as some of our cool blog entries. Featured this week is the match predictions and reveal for tonight's TSW Proving Grounds at the Vincennes Eagles Lodge. You can also check out our social media and podcast page and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as checking out some of our favorite podcasts. And finally, be sure to check out our local indie promotions page, where we've provided links to some of the hottest indie promotions in the area. Again, that's all at 10countblog.wordpress.com. This week, we were fortunate enough to sit down with Damian Baker, and he's the drummer for the Everyday Losers. A lot of people know him from his humble beginnings at TSW, though, as a performer. And let me tell you something, this guy is one of the most passionate guys I've ever met. Through talking to him both before our conversation and during the podcast, you learn that Damian is the type of guy who doesn't do anything halfway. It's kind of the go big or go home mentality, and that applies to his music, his wrestling in the ring, and just being a fan of wrestling in general. One of the cooler things that we learn while we chase some rabbits around in this podcast is that Damian has a good relationship with another friend of the show, Johnny Watts. He and Drake Graven took Damian under their wing when he was just a kid starting out at TSW, and then you learn that Damian has indie wrestling in his blood as well. His grandfather is the owner of TSW, Mr. Barry Baker. He's going to be making his grand return to the ring soon, but for now he's been focused on his music career, and with his band Everyday Losers, he's done some pretty cool things. It wasn't too long ago that these guys were on a tour with Saliva. We talk music and wrestling, and then influencing friends to become wrestling fans and giving them kind of an education about what the business is all about. We also feature one of Everyday Losers' newest songs. In fact, they're going to be having an album release show June the 1st at the Washington Moose Lodge. It's an all-ages show and $5 to get in. Check them out on Facebook at Everyday Losers. We also want to make sure we give our friends at Rollick a plug. They've allowed us to use their song Snorkeling into Oblivion as the official theme for the 10 Count podcast. Be sure to head on over to Facebook and give them a like and take a moment and download their latest album. They're giving it to you for free, and if you're in the Vincennes area on June 25th, around 2 p.m., go check out their event, the Rollick Frolic. It's at the Vincennes Riverfront Pavilion on 2nd Street. Lots of great bands on that card, including the Everyday Losers. And Damian Baker's also going to be performing at Night of Champions that night, so he's going to be pulling double duty. So get ready to rock. Here's Everyday Losers performing Against Myself, followed by our conversation with Damian Baker.
Words right, words Thanks for your honesty. Don't mean much to me. You're running scared, but don't mean anything. Got myself for that. I've got myself for that. I've got myself for that.
Promotional consideration provided by
Evansville, Indiana, on Saturday, May 28th. Get ready for an exciting night of professional wrestling as CCW proudly presents Redemption. Eddie Young and the real deal Derek Neal collide in a grudge match that's guaranteed to bring the house down. After ruthless attacks, LT Falk and Fireball Roberts team up to take on Stan Sierra and the Double R superstar Randy Royal. Also in action, legendary Larry D, Picture Perfect Jordan Cage, Mark Houston, and many more. Witness all the hard-hitting action on May 28th at the legendary Evansville Memorial Coliseum. Tickets on sale now at the Coliseum box office. General admission is only $10 or $5 with a valid military ID. VIP tables also available. Doors open at 6:30 p.m. and bell time is at 7:30 p.m. Check out the CCW Facebook page for more info. CCW Redemption on May 28th. A legacy will be born. Be there.
Damian, how are you this evening?
I'm doing awesome, man. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, and it's been a pleasure sitting here chatting with you. Of course, I always do what I call the pre-interview interview, and we sat here and we chatted for almost an hour before we did this, and so you got a lot of cool stories, a lot of stuff going on. Talk about your first experiences in wrestling. Just a lot of great stuff that you've been talking to me about.
All right, man. Really, my first big experience with pro wrestling was probably 1998. I went to my first house show. Went and saw a WCW house show, and it blew my mind to see something that close and that impactful. The hits, everything, it's just so real and just breathtaking. Ever since then, as a little kid, you kind of talk about how you want to be a firefighter or anything like that. But mine was really, I wanted to be a pro wrestler all the way up until I was about 20 years old. That was my dream, and I was really, really trying to push and live it. So, yeah. And then my grandfather, Barry Baker, who owns Tri-State Wrestling, he kind of came forward, and after my grandmother passed away, they bought a wrestling ring, my uncle and my grandfather, and it kind of all blossomed from there. That's where it kind of came out.
And see, you and I were talking earlier, and I had no clue. I knew your last name was Baker, but it just didn't put it together that Barry would be a relation to you. Talk a little bit about those first experiences in the wrestling ring, and kind of how Barry and some of the people that he's been involved with kind of shaped and influenced you as a wrestler.
Right. Well, I mean, the first time I ever stepped into the ring, I was about 14 years old. And I got a phone call from my uncle saying that they actually had the ring in the backyard, because where it all started was in my grandparents' backyard. And I came over, and they were really trying to figure out how the boards got on, because nobody there was really – there was really only one person who knew what he was doing, and it was Drake Graven, which is Jesse Meredith. I know you've heard Johnny talk about Jesse a lot. He was the only real person that knew how to set anything up, so we kind of let him take the reins. And then once we got it all set up, I took a suplex, and after that, I fell in love with it. It was the most natural thing I've ever done besides sit behind a drum set. Really, being in that backyard is some of the best memories I have, because I would be back there with all the people that started this company from the ground up, and it's very cool to see kind of where they are now. Like Johnny, I know he does all of his church stuff, and Drake where he is now. But those were I built like lifelong friendships with those people. So it's very cool to say it all started there in 2005, 2006, something like that. Can't remember exactly when we started, but yeah, pretty cool.
And so you would have been pretty young whenever that was going on.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about getting into it that young, and how I don't want to say how you had to get into it or how you kind of had to bug people into training you or
That's
whatever,
really what
but
it was, is me bugging people. So
yeah. Well, and just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was 14 years old, and I mean, even now you can see I'm skin and bone. But it's right now I'm 135 pounds soaking wet. But back then I was pushing probably 90 pounds. So it's like I was a very fragile human being, and I would I would go to all of these shows and help set up, and I would get in there when people were training and things like that. Even at 14, just to kind of learn what to do and what not to do and etiquette and things like that, and just taking bumps and running the ropes. So when I did have a chance to actually have my first match or things like that or get training, I'd already be wavelengths ahead of people. That was my goal. But on the ways home, I would get in so many arguments with my grandfather, Barry, about wanting to do it, and he was what really happened is he was coddling me because he didn't want me to get hurt. I was a very small kid, and that's what it is. I was a kid. He didn't really want me to go in there and get hurt because he knew the risks. It's not like it's a trampoline. You've obviously been in it. You know what it feels like. All it is it's wood, metal, and a little bit of padding, and that padding doesn't do that much. It just stops you from breaking a bone. That's really all it is. And I, at about, I want to say 16, finally talked him in to letting me be trained by a guy named Sean Brody. And what happened is the ring used to be, once we, the city kind of got involved and told us we couldn't have the wrestling ring in the backyard anymore because it's a giant piece, so you can't just have that without paying some type of property tax. So we actually started renting a barn from a guy, and the guys would go out there and plan everything. And Sean would go out there and he would run the ringer with me, and he would kind of show me the ropes and show me how to bump. And, I mean, obviously training didn't stop there. I went with Cody Strong, who's Bo Sawyer now, and him and Matt Martin really kind of helped me along with a guy named JP Lightning. And I've had a lot of matches with JP, and being with him really, really shaped me in knowing and being comfortable in a ring. Because even though, it's a 16 by 16 or 18 or whatever have you, it is very uncomfortable at first because you're not used to just getting hit and falling, and your body doesn't want you to do that. It's very unnatural. So everybody in that group kind of helped me get used to it and just making myself comfortable with being so small and making myself, coming up with some kind of arsenal. That way I looked believable, because that's really what it is. It's all about being believable. So, yeah.
And it sounds like you've made a lot of good friendships and had a lot of good relationships over the years. And I think ultimately that's kind of the essence of wrestling. You have to be able to trust people. You have to be able to make friends. You have to be able to talk to people.
It's so much about trust. I mean, if you look across the ring, and I've been in situations where I didn't trust the guy across the ring, and I was like, I just don't, I'm not comfortable with you. And I would, as bad as it sounds, I would try to position the match to where he wouldn't have as much lead time, because especially around Southern Indiana, you get an influx of people who know how to wrestle, with quotations, obviously, and they'll come into like I said, my grandpa is very lenient with people who come in because he wants to give everybody a chance. That's really what it's about, is he wants everybody to have a fair chance, and the same with Steven now. He wants to have everybody to have a fair chance, so people would come in, and it was just, at certain points I would go against people, and that I just wouldn't really trust them, and that's what it is. It's about trust. You have to trust that person. That's what's good about having a relationship with certain people, because once you're in the ring with them, then you can do whatever you want. You don't even have to talk most of the time because you already know where he's going to be. So that's awesome to form those friendships, on long car rides and things like that.
Talk a little bit about some of those friendships. I know you've been very close with Johnny Watts, and of course you mentioned Jesse Meredith and some of these guys. Talk a little bit about some of those relationships and how they have really helped you. I don't want to say shape kind of the person you are, but in the same token, your friendships do really help you.
They really do. I want to say the day Johnny and Drake left TSW, that was the day that we really formed a friendship, because I told, like I said, I was a kid when all this was happening, when all this kind of started forming, and they left about a year after it all started, about a year to the day, really. They were going to go, because they were, not to say they're being treated unfairly, but as a professional wrestler, it is a trade. You are kind of putting yourself out to different places, and you are an independent contractor. You really are. So you can't just be expected to wrestle once a month. And they were kind of, even at my young age, I kind of saw it as they were being treated unfairly, and they shouldn't have been held down just in one promotion. So I remember, my grandfather having a conversation with him and kind of telling him this was, you have to make a decision. You can either wrestle here or you can go there, but you cannot have both. You can't do that. And I never really understood that, but I gave them both a hug. And I just, I told him I loved them. It sucks that they have to leave. And I think in that time, it kind of, I didn't really realize how much that meant. But throughout the years, once Johnny started to come back and things like that, I think that meant a lot to him that he didn't want me to see him go. And especially with Drake. It's really, really sad to know how Drake went. And it's like you have really, really good friendships with people, and to see them just not be here anymore sucks. That's really. But forming friendships in professional wrestling is exactly like doing it in music, which I'm involved in now. If you have the right people in the right places, it's going to help you so much, because then they know connections, different things like that. So it's very rewarding to find those friends and find people that are like you, and with that same token, you're going to find people that you do not get along with at all. So, and I can tell you from personal experience that happens all the time, and it happens way more than you find friends, because you have a lot of enemies and few friends. So,
and I believe that. You mentioned earlier that kind of the day that Johnny and Drake or Jesse, I don't really know what to call him.
I call him Jesse just because he's a friend. A lot of people know him as Drake, but yeah, I've always called him Jesse. So yeah.
Well, and that's really all I've ever known him as, because the first time I ever heard his name, it came out of Johnny Watts' mouth. So, but you mentioned when they left, that's the day that you guys kind of became friends. Kind of expand on that a little bit.
They had mentioned leaving more than once. They had mentioned that they wanted. Well, really, what it was is there's a company in Evansville called CCW, and I know Drake really wanted to be a part of that, and he should have been. Drake is the best. Johnny and Drake are neck and neck. Don't get me wrong, but being in the ring with Drake was so easy, or Jesse was so easy, because you didn't have to do anything. He would put you where he needed you, and he would tell you where to go. For me, when I started working, I took advantage of knowing a little bit more, just because I'd been in the ring for so long without having a chance to wrestle. I took advantage of that, and I was probably about 6 months in, was already calling my own matches, and that doesn't happen. So I was lucky enough to have a little bit of experience on people, and I didn't need to do, if I'm in the ring with Johnny or I'm in the ring with Jesse, I never needed to do that. And it was very cool to have friends like that, to where they just kind of knew what to do. And like I said, they kind of placed you where they needed you. I remember we had this is one of my favorite memories of wrestling. We had a triple threat match, and it was me, Johnny, and Jesse. I got lucky enough to have both of them, and he went for what I thought was going to be a what do you call it, a fisherman suplex, except he spun with it, and he goes, "Just trust me." And I was like, okay. So he just went up, boom, and it was perfect. I'd never done, and for me, it was always a big thing. I was kind of afraid to do new moves and things like that, but I trusted him. That's what it's just trust. And those, for Jesse, not even in wrestling, and Johnny too, I would call them for life advice. I still do this with Johnny to this day. I can't do it with Jesse anymore because he's not with us, but if I'd have something happen, those would be one of the first people I talk to. Like, why, when something happens with me in my life, I like to get some type of perspective from other people. So those are the guys that I go to. I don't talk to Cody Strong anymore. I wish I did. We had a really good friendship for a while. I don't talk to a lot of those guys, but those are the two friendships that really, really stuck out. When I got out of high school and I broke up with my high school girlfriend, I called Jesse. He was the first one. I was like, what do I do? What do I do here? And he's like, dude, you just need to calm down. It's just, you build so many good friendships with wrestling. It's not all about just going out there and beating each other up, So.
And it sounds like, it's something that you look back on fondly and remember. And your last match, you said, was in 2013. Take me through the decision to to leave wrestling? Of course, you'd seen Johnny and Drake do it a couple times, and at this point, were you just burnt out, or what was it?
I left wrestling a couple times. The first time I left it wasn't, I don't want to say politicking, but it was more about things that were going on in the back that I did not agree with. And it was where, and I, like I said, we talked about it before this, it was me and Stephen Mitchell. And I would, he would do things, and I would explain to him that this is why you can't do that. You're going to hurt your body to the point to where, and that's not where you should be. That's not what you want to do. You should go out there and really try to portray a story, and you don't have to hurt yourself. That's the main thing. You should go out there, be safe, and I know he has a different outlook on it now, and that's very good. I'm glad he does. But back then, he had just came in to the business. He was maybe about a year in, and we would get into these little spats to where I would see him take a move on a concrete floor and just stand right up. And I would explain to him, I'd pull him aside and be like, you can't do these things because then it makes everybody else look bad. And the last straw was I was having a match with one of my friends at the time. His name's Robert. And it was after the match. I had already won. He came out and ran in. It wasn't, everybody knows wrestling's planned. So it's like we didn't have that planned. We didn't talk to him. His excuse was, I didn't know that you were going to have a chair shot on Robert. And I explained to him that you can't do those things. That was my last straw for the first time. But I think the second time that I gave it up, I wrestled Jesse, and when I came back that time for that run, it was the last run I ever did, and I was burnt out on it. And when you get burnt out, you're gonna hurt somebody because you don't want to be in there, and it's not fun anymore. And for me, for the longest time, and even now, wrestling is fun. When I see it, it's fun. When I go and buy a ticket to see an event, it's fun. I wasn't having fun anymore, and I just became burnt out on it, and it just wasn't something that I wanted to be involved in. And then luckily I picked up on music, and it kind of sent me in a direction that, I'm really glad that I took.
So let's backtrack just a little bit, and I want to make it clear to everybody, you and Steven are good now.
Right, yeah, for sure. Me and Steve, yeah, I'll shoot ideas off of Steven. I'll see him in public. We're fine. I love Steven. He's a great dude. It's just at the time, I think I was in a bad place because, like I said, I probably was burnt out. And I had been doing this since 05, 06, in a ring constantly. So it's like between me being burnt out and him being newer, I don't want to, because he was still a year in, but I mean, even a year in, you still have a lot to learn. So it's like, I think he could have took an advice a little bit better, and I think I could have handled it a little bit better, but we're good friends now, so it's all good.
And so I want to ask you kind of, now that you've been out of wrestling for a while, how do you see the lessons that you learned in the ring kind of take shape in normal life? And I know that's a weird question to ask, and I'm trying to stall so I can give you more time to think about it now. But, I mean, truly the things that we learn, through athletic ability or athletic abilities, athletic stuff we do and our extracurricular activities, they really do shape what we do in life. They shape our attitudes. And, right. and for you, I know you're very driven, and you want to succeed at what you do. Right. And I know it takes a lot of that to be successful in wrestling, but so in what you're doing now, which is music.
I think that's a big thing. You will learn very, very quickly in professional wrestling, if that's what you choose to do, that if you can't get a crowd reaction, then there's no reason for you to be there. So it's the same, and it's the same thing with music. If you can't get a rise out of somebody, if you're playing music to a crowd or they're listening to your CD, if they don't enjoy it or they don't have any type of reaction to it, then there's really no reason for them to be listening to it. And I think that has taught me so much, and also being part of wrestling has taught me how to talk to people, because you have to have a microphone in your hand. You can't be stale. That's the biggest thing. You have to be able to communicate to other people. So that has helped me in so many ventures throughout life, because I've went into job interviews and been scared to death, but it's the same kind of feeling when you're holding a microphone and you're getting ready to say your piece to the crowd. So it's like you have the butterflies in your stomach, you're like, all right, I kind of got to kill it here. So you're on the cuff and boom, you hit it, and it's just, you have to be able to communicate with people. And I think that's a beautiful thing that wrestling has taught me. And I have learned so much from professional wrestling just based off that one thing. Yeah.
And you're so passionate about it. I mean, sitting here talking to you before we started the interview, you talked about how seriously that you take it or took it and still take it.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that and why you're so passionate about it.
I think for me, as I was a younger growing up, I saw wrestling as real life superheroes. So when someone tells me that, oh, that's fake, that's not really fair, because you don't call a soap opera fake. You don't call a movie fake. You have watched it and it's happening. So to me, I just, and plus my grandpa owns a wrestling business. So for someone to tell me that it's not real, and for me to be involved in it for so long, it really does cut to the bone to me, because I know sometimes it can be hokey and things like that, but it's ever since I was younger, I've just been drawn towards it. And you don't call anything else fake like professional wrestling. It's the realest form of entertainment you can have. When you watch somebody in the ring, that's really happening. It's real time. You don't get if you go to an opera, if you go to a concert, and I'm involved in giving people concerts now, you do not get that type of interaction at all. Yeah.
Now, you talked a little bit earlier about liking to enjoying introducing people to wrestling, and for you, the joy in it comes from like the organic growth. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I have a friend that I've really been trying to introduce wrestling to him for a really long time. His name's Danny Norton. He's my bass player in the band that I'm in, the Everyday Losers. And he, nobody else in the band really cares. Tyler Seidel, who's the guitarist, has tried to kind of see my side of it. He always walks in on like a New Day segment or like an R-Truth segment to where he's like, why is this interesting to you? And it's so hard to explain to him, because it's just wrestling. Like, you have to get past some of the dumb stuff to get to the cool stuff, And, he always walks in on like a Ric Flair segment where he's going insane. So you have to sit down and explain to him that it's not always this way. There is a cool side to it. There is a professional side to it. And with Danny, he's seen me watch it for so long. And I think going to a couple of live events, I can't express to you how different it is at a live event, because you're there and you're hearing all of those things. You're hearing the reactions. You're hearing those wrestlers get the response that they want out of a crowd. So I think going to a WWE event helped him. We went to an NXT event, which I know helped him, because NXT is so much different than the WWE product right now. They're putting on... I've been to a bunch of live events. I've been to a SmackDown taping. I have never seen anything like what I saw at an NXT taping. It was insane. They're like, or not taping, but a live event in Indy, I think it was. But yeah, it just showing him all of those things. It's very cool to see him start to like get an interest. I think it was 2 weeks ago, he texted me. He's like, "Did you watch Raw?" And I was like, "There it is. I got him." It's like the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. It's so cool to see him start to react. And I'll text him about, "Hey, this is going to be here. Do you want to go see that?" And he's like, "Yeah. Order the tickets." Like NXT is going to be in Evansville. And I texted him. I was like, "We got to get front row. I've never been front row before, and that's the best show I've ever seen." Tickets went on sale. We actually got front row. Like, we're smack dab right there. So we're both really excited about that. And that brings up another thing. It's so cool to just be a fan again. You know what I mean? Like, as much as I enjoyed being in the ring, it's so cool to just be able to sit back and not have to worry about, does that look good? At the same time, you're still a wrestler, so you're like, oh, that kind of looked like shit. But you still see, it's just cool to be able to sit back and be like, I don't have to worry if this looks good, and it doesn't affect me, so I can just sit back and enjoy this as a fan again.
So being from wrestling stock and your grandfather owns this company, why not try to get these guys involved in the local shows too? I mean, or is that something you have tried to do?
Because I was in wrestling, it's not that I want to necessarily steer anybody away from it, because it's a wonderful business. If you think you can handle it, that's completely fine, but it will tear you up. My biggest fear is going up 2 flights of steps, because if I can make it up the first one, then the second one is just terrible on my knees. It's, I did it, and I didn't do it for very long. It wasn't that long of a stint, and I took a couple of breaks in between. But I mean, sometimes I'll get up and my back is just says no, and I received a concussion, and even to this day, it's hard for me to remember things that someone tells me 10 minutes ago. That's scary. And as a friend, I don't necessarily know if if I want him to be involved in that. It's a beautiful business and I love it, but I just don't know if I would want any of my friends to get involved in it.
And I understand that. And for me, it's kind of one of those. I found it randomly on Facebook. That's actually how I got introduced to TSW, was went through their Facebook. And I went and saw it, and of course I thought it was going to be hokey and cheesy and terrible, but it ended up being really good.
I mean, you get some of those matches that are where the guys, like, I mean, before I actually started wrestling, I was a referee. I would referee for my grandfather, which is very Bret Hart of me to to be the referee first and get beat on. But the point is, I sat through a couple of matches to where they did like 12 DDTs. Why? You know what I mean? Like, that's just something that you can not do. You can work that out. Like, you have the option of sitting down with that person and going, here's what we should do. If you're not comfortable with walking and talking in the ring, because I know that getting to that point is very difficult. Being that comfortable with yourself and being that comfortable with whoever is on the other side of the ring, that's difficult. So planning things out isn't a bad thing. Do that. Because I sat there and I watched some of that stuff happen. I was like, oh, gosh, guys, it looked terrible,
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I didn't phrase my question well, and you still gave a really good answer. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, that was not what. No, but I guess. Do you ever steer your friends who you're trying to grow up organically to become fans? Do you ever steer them to become fans of indie wrestling rather than, the bigger promotions? Because indie wrestling, it's kind of a hot commodity right now, and I think it's the best it's ever been.
Oh, if I watch, I've always watched New Japan Pro Wrestling. I've always had my eye on it. Now more than ever, I pay attention to it because you see guys like Shinsuke Nakamura coming over, and before he came over, I was a really big fan of him. I'm really excited because I finally get to see him in Evansville. That was my big thing. I was like, I have to sit front row and see him kick somebody's head in. Like, that has to be my thing. But I want to do any person that I want to be a fan. I kind of want to show them WWE first so they know where the big league is. And then after that, I like to show them some of the smaller promotions like Evolve or Ring of Honor, different things. Pro Wrestling Guerrilla is another really big one. They have fantastic talent there. And a lot of those guys that came through there are WWE stock now. They're really, they're like Daniel Bryan, your CM Punks, which I don't know if we can say that, but it's like those are the ones that came through there and wrestled in those promotions. And my favorite thing is to see a guy come in, be in those promotions, make his way all the way up, and then be in WWE. Look at Seth Rollins, look at Dean Ambrose. It's so cool to see him go from CZW, which I'm not a fan of CZW. For me, there's a time and a place to hit somebody with a steel chair and things like that, but that's in due time in a storyline. It has to make sense. I'm not into light tubes and all of that jazz. That has a time and place, and it's just not for me.
Yeah, that's like almost gore for the sake of gore.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just a wrestler fan. I just can't, but I try to, like with Danny now, I'm trying to get him involved with Ring of Honor and New Japan because I think there was Ring of Honor was in Chicago a couple of weekends ago, and we had a show on Sunday. So I was like, oh, well, we can't go to that. So I wanted to go, but just because it's so different than watching WWE, and because Ring of Honor, it's just so cool to see them do things that WWE doesn't. You know what I mean? Like they do bigger moves. They're allowed to do different things. With WWE, they kind of tone him down a little bit. Like now you see Seth Rollins. He's still allowed to do really cool things, but you can tell that he's toned down if you watch his Ring of Honor stuff as Tyler Black. So,
yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to watch that as a fan. I don't know, but let's kind of transition a little bit here because you didn't only come here to talk about wrestling, and that's the cool thing about this is I try very, very much so to be all-inclusive with my podcast. And so, after you got through wrestling, you kind of transitioned into real life, and it's like, okay, so what do I do now? And you mentioned that wrestling came very naturally to you, but also, drumming came very naturally to you. Talk a little bit about transitioning into where you are now.
Right. I'd say the first time I ever got to sit behind a drum set was probably 8th grade. And the whole reason I wanted to drum is because my uncle at the time had a drum set. It had a very, very nice pearl drum set, and he would not let me touch it. And I was like, well, I'll show you, dude. So, I mean, I guess I'm doing pretty okay now with it. But the whole basis was just to show him that I could get behind a drum set and be able to, do it. So, the transition to that, I've always loved music. My parents have always instilled in me that, they always let me listen to what type of music I wanted to. They were very, AC/DC, different things like that. They never had any cap on that. They were just, if you find something that you connect with, you're allowed to listen to that. And I always thought that was really, really cool. So I knew that I was either going to be a professional wrestler or a drummer for a rock band. And as weird as those two things sound as a job, I always had a dream, so to speak. I never thought that I would go to college and be, I did end up at college for a second, but I just, I never wanted to settle down and have a desk job. So it's very cool to be able to say that I get to go out and do tours behind a drum kit, and that's just so neat, because if you would tell 14-year-old me that, I just think you're crazy. Like, that's insane. I actually get to go and do these things and meet cool people. I get to meet Grammy-nominated artists. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said earlier, and this was actually the thing that you said, wrestling and music, they kind of go hand in hand as far as their similarities. Talk a little bit about that.
For sure. Well, it's like, and it all goes back to the friendship thing. You're writing and music the driving is so much worse because you have 4 different people, and if you're behind the wheel, you should get to control the radio, because that's just fair. You have to be awake. Everybody else has a choice to go to sleep. So when I'm listening to something and someone's like, "Can you turn this?" It sucks. It's just like that starts an argument, and you got to be in the vehicle for 6 more hours with them. But I still, everybody I've ever ridden in a vehicle with wrestling, they know I love them, and it's the same thing with the band. They really have a lot of similarities. It's like it really boils down to whoever you know in the wrestling industry can get you to a higher place, and whoever knows you in a music industry can get you to a higher place. It's all about who you know.
And that's kind of cool, a cool way to put it, because you don't really put those two together very much.
For sure.
So talk a little bit about, real quick before we move on, I just looked at my notes and saw something that I've had to ask about. Talk a little bit about past Johnny. And of course, Johnny Watts, he's a friend of this show. But I've only ever known him as the clown.
Right.
You've known him for so long. I got to know some of his personality traits from way back when.
Johnny, when I first met him, not that he's not funny now, but Johnny was one of the funniest people I had ever met in my life, and the same with Jesse. That's why if you can make me laugh, then we're going to be great. We're just going to do okay. So I remember one of the first things I ever saw. He was one of the first people I ever see do. What is it? You run onto the rope and do the backflip. What is it? Lion salt? Is that what it is? Yeah. He was the first person I ever saw live do a lion salt. So that immediately I was like, this dude's got it. Like he used to go by the ring name Evan Betta, if that tells you anything, and Superstar, if that tells you what kind of humor he has. So there was at one point, I can't remember what match it was. It had to be a tag match because he was doing tags then, and they had this planned out because I watched him planned it, and I was like, this is gonna be dumb. But in the match, what he wanted to do was he was gonna jump to the top rope and do a flip, and we were in a basketball gym, mind you, and there were no mats, and have them move and him do a flip onto the ground and hit solid. And I watched him go to the top rope because I was running sound that night. Watched him go to the top rope, jump off, land, and I saw him see the mistake in his eyes as he was going to the floor. It was the funniest thing. He was just funny, man. He's still that guy, but I mean, it was untamed at that point because he was younger. He had his long hair. He was hilarious to be around. The same with Jesse. Jesse was funny too. They were both just really, really funny guys.
And we'll talk a little bit more about there's kind of a connection between you and Johnny and Jesse, and it comes. It's mostly because of TSW, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. and now I guess I'll jump back into. We're kind of chasing rabbits here,
Right.
yeah. So, but talk a little bit about doing the music thing now, and you're going on tours. You mentioned meeting Grammy-nominated artists.
Right.
Was it Saliva you guys were
Yeah.
on tour with not
Yeah.
too long ago?
Yeah.
So you guys you're living a dream that a lot of people have, but very few actually get to live. So talk a little bit about that.
The biggest thing I want people to understand is we're not in this to make money, and right now we're not. And I mean, I know that sounds discouraging, but when the term starving artist literally means starving artist. I mean, you're on the road, and before you leave, I know Tyler and Dylan's family, they're so good to us before we leave, because they always make sure that we have, at least 2 weeks worth of food so we can at least eat a little bit before we get out there, because really all you're selling is your merch. In our position, we're not getting paid. It's all about, do we have a product enough? Did you like us enough to go buy it? So it's really, once again, it's the same thing as wrestling, because you're selling yourself and you're making sure that that person wants your product. But it's just, the first tour we ever went on, I was working at Purdue Farms in Washington, and we got the call, and it was from Phil Taylor from Future Leaders of the World. They had a hit, and I think 04 or 05, it's called Let Me Out. And they were going to go on tour with Saliva because they had a new album out. So Phil calls Tyler, because they recorded with Phil before I was in the band. And he said, hey, we need an opener. Can you guys give us this much money before we leave? This is about 3 weeks before the tour, by the way. That doesn't happen. That's not normal. A tour is like, to get your proper exposure, you need a radio campaign. You need to be on the posters so people can see it and want to listen to your music and go, oh, okay, I like that enough when I saw it on YouTube that I want to come to that show. So Phil calls us up and asks us if we want to go on this tour. We got 3 weeks to prepare and get all this money together. I had to walk into my boss's office and tell him, that I couldn't work there anymore. I had to quit my job to go and do what I wanted to do in life, which is really just go on a stage and play drums in front of people. And as scary as it was then, I would not go back and trade that for the world, because I have seen some of the most beautiful things in the world just waking up inside of a van. We went to Colorado on this last run with Saliva, and I woke up and I've never seen mountains before, and it was just insane, and you get out of the van and it's the cleanest air you'll ever breathe. And I know that sounds so weird, but it really is. It's like, I woke up one time, we were on a ferry in New York going to Long Island. It's just the coolest, and the best part is you get to experience it with your 3 best friends. That's the best part, because it's not just you. That's very cool.
So what's it like? For me, I say that I'm musically inclined. I own musical instruments, but I don't know that I necessarily play them well. What's it like just being able to be around musicians, artists? Similar to wrestling. These guys are artists. You guys are artists. What's it like just being around those people? You mentioned, you have all your best friends.
Right. When I'll actually take you back to when I tried out for the Everyday Losers once before, and I was terrible back then. I was just the worst. I couldn't keep time. I didn't listen to the songs very well, so I didn't know them. And then I kind of got involved with their sister's project, which was called Uncle Jesse's Girl. It was a bar band, and Tyler was involved, which is my guitarist now, and so was Danny, who was the bass player. And we had a friend named Josh Lee, and he was involved, and Josh kind of left the folk because he went back to college in the fall, so Dylan had to fill that void. And it was so intimidating to play with those 3, because they're such good musicians. If you take Danny out of the equation, it's different. If you take Dylan out of the equation, it's different. All of us together work so well. It's such a good gelling project, and it was so scary at first that I don't think I talked to Dylan for 6 months. They're so intimidating, but once you start actually writing music with them and you sit down and you learn all of their songs, and I had a second tryout after Nico left. I never thought that I would get that second tryout, and Dylan and Tyler, I guess, saw something in me. I don't know. But I had that second tryout, and I actually got to be able to be in the band that I really wanted to be. And it's been so rewarding. If you put the work in, you will see results, and that's what I'm saying now. It's very, very cool to be able to go on the road and do all these things with my 3 best friends.
And that's awesome. That's a something I always dreamed about as a kid. We played your song a little bit earlier. Talk a little bit about that particular song. I mean, I don't know if there's some deep-seated meaning behind it or anything like that, but what's it like being in the studio and making stuff like that?
Right. That particular song, I don't... See, what's weird is a lot of times we write songs when Tyler goes to the bathroom. I know that sounds so weird, but Tyler would go to the bathroom and it would just be me and Dylan, because Danny works during the week. He installs cable throughout the country. So it'll be me and Dylan, and I can't remember if that's one where Dylan was just doodling on the guitar and I was just drumming away. But I remember when we actually got the first part, which is it's a wah on the guitar, and it's such a powerful intro that it had to be our first single. And it has to be that first thing that people hear when we open up a show, because it's such a powerful song. I've never heard anything like it, and the same goes for this record. I've never heard anything like this record, and I'm so confident. And if nothing happens with this record, I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm so afraid that nothing's going to happen with it. But recording it was, I was actually on one song on the album before this because I sucked when we got into the studio. It was terrible. And that was just a combination of nerves and living up to Nico's drumming, because Nico is a phenomenal drummer. He's a fantastic person. He did awesome with our recording this time. It was just a combination of being scared and, trying to live up to Nico's, expectations, and I just couldn't on that first record. And I got to be on one song, which is one that I helped write drums to. And the second time around, I was hellbound to make sure I wasn't going to be pigeonholed as the person who wasn't good enough to be on another record. So I would sit in my room for at least 30 minutes a night and pick 4 songs off of the new record and play them in my head, because we haven't recorded them yet. So I would just go through the motions and listen to a click track of how fast I thought it would be. And once again, click tracks are so intimidating because you have to be directly on time. Otherwise, otherwise you're just going to be on time. So they're so intimidating. And I finally, I got really confident with it, and I got in there and I laid all the tracks down. And it's just so rewarding to be able to hear the songs that we made in their basement, It's just 4 people who gel very, very well together, and it's just so awesome to be able to have that on a record. We're going to get it pressed. Hopefully we have it out by July 1st, I think is our CD release show at the Moose in Washington. And, hopefully everybody digs it.
All right, awesome. Well, Damon, we are running out of time. Before we go, though, I want you to plug a couple of things you got coming up. Of course, a lot of people... We talked a lot about you being wrestling and being involved in wrestling. You've got your last wrestling match ever coming up here in the next little bit, and it's actually going to be at Night of Champions for TSW. Talk a little bit about that and what brought you back in.
Right. I think the biggest thing that brought me in is I missed all of Jesse's memorial stuff. Wrestling... After I stepped away from it and I was burnt out on it, I decided that I wanted to have nothing to do with it except for watching it, because obviously I still had the bug, as everybody calls it, and you can't ever fully step away from it as much as people try to. Hulk Hogan, But I saw after Jesse,
Ric Flair.
Right? Yeah, there you go. I saw after Jesse passed away that they did all the memorial stuff, and they do an annual thing, and I just felt that, in memory of one of my best friends, that I should be involved at least one more time. And if I can't do it with him, then I'm going to do it with one of my other best friends, which is Johnny Watts. And we're both going to be involved in a battle royal. And I know that Johnny loved Jesse, but Jesse had more than one best friend. So I'm really hoping that Johnny realizes that going in, that he's not the favorite to win.
Fair enough. Strong language. So, Damian, how can people support you? Where can they get Everyday Losers music? Just what can people do to support you and your quest for getting this record out and making it a success?
Tell you what, man, you can go on to Facebook on the Everyday Losers. We have a website, just www.theeverydaylosers.com. We're on Spotify, iTunes. I think we're on Pandora now. I'm pretty sure, now that I'm thinking about it, yeah. At least our old album is. We're looking to put everything else on there. Come out to our live shows. I can't stress enough that even though our records are top-notch, nothing compares to our live shows, because we're up there going apeshit. So it's like I break everything. It's like all of our stuff is just so awesome to hear live, and I can't stress that enough. I'm a really big stickler on live music. I love to go see concerts, and like we, as a band, probably go see 3 concerts a month. We just went and saw a band called Local H in Chicago, so we're not afraid to drive to see our favorite bands. Get out and support music for sure, because that's a big thing. I've been on tours to where there weren't that many people there, and go out and see your favorite band. Don't be afraid to get into the pit.
I try to avoid circle pits, though.
Right.
All right, well, Damian, it was great having you on, man. Thank you for agreeing to do this, and I wish you the best of luck with everything you do.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, man.
Special thanks to Damian for being on the podcast this week and being so candid with us. We wish him and his bandmates best of luck as they continue to make the world a more musical place. But for now, let's get to some upcoming events. Tonight, May 28th, Tri-State Wrestling hosts Proving Grounds from the Vincennes Eagles Club on Willow Street. Zach Hogan and Will Bray battle for the opportunity to choose the stipulation for their match at Night of Champions in June. Tickets are $5 at the door, and all proceeds go to the family of Phyllis Miracle Hall, who recently lost a battle with cancer. Kids 4 and under are free. Doors open at 6 p.m. Bell time's at 7. Again, that's all at Eastern Time. You can also check out our predictions article for that show on our website, 10countblog.wordpress.com. Also tonight, May 28th, our newest partner, Coliseum Championship Wrestling, presents Redemption at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum at 300 Court Street in Evansville. Lots of big names on the card for that event. Be sure to check it out if you're in the area. Tickets are $10 at the door, $5 with military ID. Kids 5 and under are free. You can also reserve a VIP table. Check out their Facebook page for more details. And one last one for tonight, May 28th, New Wave Pro Wrestling presents Fan Appreciation Night at the NWP Arena. Doors open at 6, the show's at 7 Eastern Time. All tickets are general admission and only $5. Lots of great names on the card like Sam Knight, Joey O'Reilly, Blake Reed, and many more. It's all at the NWP Arena at 1439 Ash Street in Terre Haute. Wednesday, June the 1st, New Focus Wrestling will have a show at the Evansville Memorial Coliseum. Again, that's at 300 Court Street in Evansville. Match card features names like Tracy Smothers, Cliff Compton, Xander Kelly, Will Bray, Zach Hogan, Scotty Wolf, and many more. Tickets are $10 at the door, $5 with military or veteran ID. Kids 5 and under are free. Bell time is at 6:30 Central Time. June the 11th, Tri-State Wrestling makes its grand return to the Blue Jeans Center in Monroe City, Indiana. More details are forthcoming about this show, but TSW's partnered with the Blue Jeans Center to do a show there every month for the rest of the summer. We'll bring you more details as soon as we have them. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and SoundCloud. Go and rate us. Help the world know about 10 Count Podcast and 10 Count Blog, and get us on that new and noteworthy list. Also, don't forget to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find links to all of those on this article at 10countblog.wordpress.com, or you can check out our social media and podcast page and find them there. We're always accepting blog submissions. If you want to write something about wrestling, go ahead and send that to us at 10countblog@gmail.com. It can be about any topic that you choose, as long as it's related to wrestling. Thanks to Rollick again for allowing us to use Snorkeling into Oblivion as our theme song. Check them out on Facebook and download all of their music for free. Be sure to check out the Rollick Frolic June 25th at the Vincennes Riverfront Pavilion. Don't forget to visit us at 10countblog.wordpress.com, subscribe on iTunes and SoundCloud, and rate us and leave us a good review. I promise it'll only take about 5 minutes. We'll be back next week with a guest to be announced a little bit later on. Until then, thanks for checking out the 10 Count Podcast.